Congratulations! You just bought a big new house in the suburbs with a backyard pool that you'll probably never use, and a double-door garage, which takes up half the entire house. But who cares, cause you can now relax knowing you're living the American dream. Oh yeah! But then you wake up on Monday morning realizing you have to commute to work, and the only option available is to sit in hours of soul-crushing traffic. Good grief. On a serious note, this scenario isn't too far off from what many people experience. On average, Americans spend nearly an hour a day commuting to and from work, and nearly 10% of commuters spend over 2 hours commuting, most of which looks like this. Or like this, if you're lucky enough. As a result, many people find that their entire lives revolve around nothing but going to work, working, and going back home, leaving no time for socializing, relaxing, or just living life. Now, of course, there are a bunch of big societal issues that we can blame, but what's often overlooked is urban design. Our built environment plays a huge role in shaping how we live, so how can we design our cities to make us happier?
I get on the train at 7:30 and I don't get home till like 6:15 earliest, and then I don't have time to do anything.
It's only an hour and a half by GO train. Has to be one of the worst quality of life decisions I have ever made.
One aspect of North American cities that really stands out is how spread out everything is. They're incredibly large and sprawling. This is because of our wasteful land use. We put no value on using our available land efficiently. Millions of acres of farmland are paved each year for sprawling suburbs and strip malls with giant surface parking lots, while dying malls and neighborhoods in the city are just left there to rot. Even the land around transit stations, which should be the most valuable real estate in the city, is just used for parking lots and self-storage facilities. This wasteful land use is built into our zoning laws and regulations. Majority of the land in North American cities are exclusively zoned for single-family homes, and minimum parking requirements force businesses to build giant parking lots that are bigger than the store itself. So by design, North American cities are large and sprawling, forcing many people to commute long distances. Everything is too spread out to walk or cycle, so driving is the dominant form of transportation. Even if you're lucky enough to have public transit, there isn't enough density around it to support it, meaning you still have to drive or take a slow, crappy bus to the train station. Of course, there are people who choose to live in a distant suburb, hoping that cheaper housing or better career opportunities will make up for the long commute. Some people, known as super commuters, might even live in a completely different city altogether. But a 2004 study titled "Stress That Doesn't Pay: The Commuting Paradox" reveals that this trade-off isn't actually worth it, and people with longer commutes have significantly lower life satisfaction. For my commutes, I like to take the train as it allows me to catch up on work, such as doing research for these videos. But it's crucial to find sources that are factual and unbiased. That's why I use Ground News, the platform that combines various sources from around the world to give you the whole picture. While researching for this video, I found this article about President Biden giving $3 billion in funding for the Brightline West high-speed rail, which would connect LA to Las Vegas. Using Ground News, I can see that there are 94 sources covering this topic, and most are left and center biased. I can also see that most are highly factual, and are mostly owned by media conglomerates. What's really helpful is how we can compare the headlines coming from the left, center, and right. Left-leaning sources like the NBC use the title "Feds Grant $6 billion for high-speed rail projects." But notice the different wording on right-leaning sources, such as "Biden pours billions of taxpayer dollars into California's floundering high-speed rail project." So if you're like me and you value the truth, I would highly recommend Ground News. You can get 40% off an unlimited access Vantage plan by visiting ground.news/flurf. This not only supports my channel, but also the small team working to hold the media accountable. Thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. There's a huge difference between driving casually and driving as a commute. During a commute, everyone's in a rush and has less patience, so everyone's angry and honking at each other. The enjoyment of driving comes from the feeling of freedom and control. The the ability to propel yourself at high speeds. But when you're stuck in traffic every morning trying to get to work, it's frustrating as you're not able to go as fast as you could. Not to mention how dehumanizing it is when everyone's face is obscured behind glass and metal, making them mere obstacles that get in your way. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with driving in particular. The issue is being dependent on driving. People who live in walkable or transit-oriented places can drive to work, but they have the option to walk, bike, or take transit if it's more convenient. They have the freedom to not have to drive, and that makes a huge difference for everyone, including drivers. A Dutch survey taken during the pandemic found that those who walked or biked missed their commutes way more than those who drove. This isn't really surprising. When your commute allows you to get exercise at the same time, it boosts your mood and makes you more energized. A while back, I decided to commute by bicycle, and I immediately noticed how good I felt afterwards, compared to how stressful it was to take public transit. I was more focused and productive. I always arrived on time, because bicycles don't get stuck in traffic. But most importantly, I enjoyed it. Commuting was actually fun. Now that study was of course taken in the Netherlands, where they actually have laws and regulations to restrict suburban sprawl, and walking and cycling are significantly more safe than in North America. This is mainly why I stopped bike commuting, as the distance was quite long and I had way too many close calls with drivers. Not only are American cities big and spread out, the actual infrastructure design is completely hostile to people walking or cycling. When the bike lane is just a narrow strip of paint next to high-speed traffic, or when crosswalks make you traverse numerous wide lanes while dodging turning vehicles, it's understandable why everyone drives, even if they literally live across the street. College students are especially affected by long commutes and large distances. A Toronto survey found that 30% of all post-secondary students spend more than 2 hours a day commuting to and from school, and this can have severe impacts on academic performance, as you may be discouraged from attending class or have to wake up early and sacrifice sleep. Commuter students in general tend to be more stressed, as they are more likely to have other commitments like a job or looking after younger siblings. In reference to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, commuter students spend a lot of time focusing on bottom tier needs like food and sleep, making it hard to focus on higher tier needs that are more relevant to their education. This leads us to another issue with the sprawling nature of American cities: social isolation. To help explain this, I'm going to get my friend Rachel from the channel Studio Leonardo, who knows a lot more about this than me.
Hey everybody, thanks again Fleur for having me on. And again, I'm an enthusiast, not an expert. So I'm curious about the same topics that you guys are and just like to share my learnings. Single-use zoning laws lend itself to landowners being able to build larger homes on their properties year after year, tripling the normal house size from the 1950s at 936 square feet to these large homes that we see today. Now, taking advantage of having more space in larger homes isn't actually the problem here. What's really the issue is that these homes are only accessible by single families. Speaking of which, the nuclear family in the United States in the 1950s was at 3.5 people per household. Today, that number is 2.5 people. What we're seeing here is that we are building bigger homes and have less family members occupying them. Think about the spaces that you use in your house. What are the rooms that you're most consistently in for over an hour a day? We tend to gravitate towards bedrooms, living rooms, and office spaces, all of which grant us the flexibility that we need on a day-to-day basis to live, and leaving other spaces in our homes unused. Having these larger spaces can also lead to more isolating behaviors as well. For example, if it's more convenient for you to work out at home, you are potentially missing the opportunity to meet up with friends or serendipitously hang out with people in the gym that you go to. Unfortunately, the harsh reality of it all is these larger homes are only bringing us short-term joy, which is dispelled by the fact that we don't have connections to strong communities. And as we continue to build outward and away from our cities, it makes it even more difficult for us to connect with friends and meet up with them.
Indeed, having a city that's big and spread out means your friends are more likely to be spread out as well. A 2009 study found that the longer zones commute, the more dispersed their social networks are. This shouldn't be too surprising. If your school or workplace is hours away, you're probably not going to meet many people from your local area. So when you and your friends want to meet up, It takes an overwhelming amount of effort. You have to consider where each of you live and how far everyone's willing to travel. Then you have to find places and activities that align with those boundaries. While hanging out, one of you may have to leave earlier so you don't get home too late. And if you're driving, you can't have any drinks.
Let me give you an example of how I meet up with my friends here in Spain and in the US. Besides the major price difference, what I have to deal with when I'm going out with friends in the US is planning down our nights to a T. Changes in my plans in DC are rarely ever made, or at least I'm not a huge fan of making them, because that means incurring costs like parking, Uber, and Metro. The DC Metro could definitely use a few more stops in between some of their major ones, but that's a story for a different time. While in Spain, these conveniences are not behind a paywall. It takes about 30 minutes by bus to get to the downtown area, of which you don't have to worry if you've had too much to drink that night or are going out late, because they run at such a frequency that it makes it much more convenient for you to go out, have a good time, and get back to your home safely and securely. Once you're in the city center, it doesn't take long to get anywhere by foot. The close proximity of all these places creates a good sense of ambiente, or atmosphere, in the streets and the plazas next to these bars. And economically speaking, this is also beneficial for all of them as well, as you have a constant flow of people in and out of your spaces on an hourly basis.
All this being said, there is one place found all over North America that does all of this very well. College and university is often looked back upon with fond memories, and many people say it was the best period of their lives. I think part of this has to do with how campuses are designed. Everything is walkable and the environment is pleasant to be in. Libraries, lounges, study halls, or even a local cafe all serve as third places for students that are easily accessible. This isn't just limited to campuses either. College towns overall tend to be designed much better than other places, with better public transit, pedestrian and bike infrastructure, and more density. Even big cities usually have better urbanism in the area around a university.
Seth Kaplan, the author of Fragile Neighborhoods, describes the urgency in our need to identify and establish local institutions in American society today. Universities actually are a great example of institutions in American society that we have praised for generations. They share certain characteristics, like being close to bars and restaurants in the downtown area that you don't necessarily need to take a car to get to. They have on-campus traditions and local sporting events, so that even though you may not get along with a certain person at your university on a day-to-day basis, you all can come together under certain traditions and unique aspects of what brought you to that university to begin with. This creates a greater sense of social cohesion and camaraderie amongst the people inside of these communities, overall creating stronger bonds and strong community connections.
The sad reality is that for many people, college is the only time of their lives where they get to experience a truly walkable place. But there's still definitely a lot we can learn from them. A 1973 psychology study compared two college dorms. One was shaped in a long corridor, kind of like a hotel, while the other was broken up into suites with a lounge area in the middle. They found that the students in the corridors felt crowded and stressed out. They avoided each other and were less helpful to one another. The suite residents, on the other hand, actually became friends and supported one another. This was because the design of the corridor made it impossible to control your social interactions. There was no buffer between the privacy of your room and the public hallway. To put it simply, modern suburbia can cause loneliness as it discourages social interactions. But at the same time, dense cities can be overstimulating and make people withdraw into isolation. So instead, we need a balance. Our cities need to encourage social interactions, but also provide places of solitude we can retreat to. We tend to tolerate other people more when we know we can escape from them. A great example of this middle ground are the streetcar suburbs built in the early 1900s. Since they predated modern zoning laws, they're much denser and walkable, with third places seamlessly integrated into neighborhoods. You'll find back alleyways or these small pocket parks which serves as gathering spaces for local residents, as well as being a buffer from the street, providing privacy.
It's about finding a balance between dense pockets of high activity and those that offer us more relaxed spaces. The Navarreria in Pamplona is a place that has a lot of bars and attracts a lot of young people to come and have a drink and eat on the weekends. DC's 14th and U Street has a very similar model, although may look different. But there are certain plazas in Pamplona as well that offer spaces for more family-friendly activities during those same time frames. by placing bars in more sporadic areas or next to playgrounds so that the kids can enjoy themselves as well as their parents and grandparents. And how do we end up building spaces like this? Well, to more effectively tackle our infrastructure problems, we need to reform our zoning codes from that of single-use zoning styles to a more form-based code method in the future. A form-based code puts more emphasis on the form or the shape of the building rather than the actual function that it holds inside of it. As we get closer to cities with higher height limits, then the buildings themselves can also have higher heights and therefore have higher density of functions. Setting height limits to certain regional areas helps to reduce the amount of skyscrapering of different suburban places that many people seem to be afraid of. We also need to incentivize the use of these spaces through different community activities. In fact, that university model that we talked about in the United States is kind of exemplified here in Spain as well, with each town having their own festival annually for a 7 to 9 day period where each of them celebrates why they uniquely are themselves.
Urban design plays a huge role in shaping how we live. When you make it easy to walk, cycle, or take transit, you give people the freedom to choose how they get around. But when you build your city solely around cars, people will shape their lives around driving. If we design our cities for people rather than cars, we can make them places to live and not places to leave.